26,000 years ago, a wall of ice, 2 miles thick, sat on top of what is now Chicago. The glaciers stretched from the Arctic down through Canada, across the Great Lakes, and into parts of what we call the American Midwest. Across the Atlantic, another ice sheet buried Scandinavia and reached as far south as Denmark and Wales. The average global temperature had dropped by roughly 6 degrees Celsius compared to today. That might not sound like much, but it was enough to redraw the map of the entire planet. And somehow, right in the middle of all of it, people survived. Not a handful of them huddled in some warm corner of the tropics. Thousands of them, scattered across frozen Europe and northern Asia, eating, building, hunting, and even making art, while the world around them tried to kill them every single day. The question is how? Because on paper, they should not have made it. To understand what these people were up against, you have to picture a version of Europe that looks nothing like the one on your screen right now. During the Last Glacial Maximum, the coldest stretch of the most recent ice age, the continent was a treeless steppe. Grasslands and tundra stretched from the Atlantic coast of France all the way to Siberia, interrupted only by mountain glaciers and frozen river valleys. In parts of Central Europe, winter temperatures dropped to -30 or -40 degrees. The air was dry, the wind was relentless, and the growing season for any kind of plant food was painfully short. Sea levels had plummeted by more than 100 meters because so much of the planet's water was locked up in ice. Entire coastlines that humans once lived on are now sitting under the ocean. In Siberia, the drop in sea level actually created a land bridge connecting Asia to North America, which is how the first people eventually crossed into the Americas. The Sahara Desert, which today is one of the hottest places on Earth, expanded massively during this period because the cold dried out the moisture systems that once fed its grasslands. Africa's rainforests shrank. Mountain ranges on every continent were buried in glaciers. This was not a local weather event. This was a global transformation that lasted thousands of years, and the humans living through it had no way of knowing whether it would ever end. For a species that evolved in equatorial Africa, where the sun beats down year-round and fruit grows on trees you can reach without tools, this should have been a death sentence. And for a long time, scientists assumed that early humans handled the cold the way most animals did. They thought our ancestors retreated to warmer pockets of southern Europe, places like the Iberian Peninsula and the Italian coast, and waited out the worst of the Ice Age before spreading north again. It made perfect sense. But a study led by Bournemouth University, published in the journal Diversity, found something that contradicted this entirely. When researchers traced the genetic histories of 23 common European mammals, they discovered that humans did not contract into warm southern refuges during the Last Glacial Maximum. Instead, they stayed put. They remained spread across the continent, even in the harshest zones. And the animals that followed the same pattern were wolves and brown bears, two species known for being incredibly tough. Professor John Stewart, one of the researchers on the project, said it was surprising that humans followed this same strategy because their African origins made cold climate resilience seem unlikely. But there they were, standing their ground on frozen soil, right next to the predators. So what did they have that the retreating species did not? The answer starts with fire, but not fire the way you are thinking about it. Not a campfire someone lit to warm their hands. This was a technology so advanced that modern researchers are still working to understand how it was done. At an archaeological site called Korman 9, on the banks of the Dniester River in what is now Ukraine, a team of scientists from the University of Algarve and the University of Vienna uncovered 3 ancient hearths dating to the Last Glacial Maximum. These were simple, flat, open fireplaces, nothing fancy to look at. But when the researchers ran a colorimetric analysis on the soil underneath the burn sites, they found something remarkable. The ground beneath those fires had been heated to over 600 degrees Celsius. That is not an accident. That is not someone tossing a branch on a flame and hoping for the best. That is controlled, deliberate, sustained, burning by people who understood fire the way a modern engineer understands a furnace. William Murphree, a geoarchaeologist on the study, pointed out that well-preserved hearths from this period are extremely rare, which makes the Corman 9 findings especially valuable. Philipp Nigst from the University of Vienna explained that these hunter-gatherers had not just mastered fire, but had learned to use it in different ways depending on the season and the purpose. One of the 3 fireplaces was larger and thicker than the others, suggesting higher temperatures were reached there, possibly for different tasks like cooking versus warming versus tool making. The primary fuel they used was wood, specifically spruce, which is remarkable when you consider that this was a period when forests were thinning and timber was hard to come by. Some of the animal bones found at the site had been burned at temperatures exceeding 650 degrees Celsius, suggesting they may have also burned bone and fat as supplementary fuel when wood ran short. Fire did more than keep people warm. It cooked food, which made nutrients easier to absorb and killed parasites that could devastate a small community with no medicine. It hardened the tips of wooden spears, making them sharper and more durable. It provided light during winters when the sun barely cleared the horizon for weeks at a time. And perhaps, just as importantly, it created a gathering point. A hearth was the center of a social world. People sat around it to eat, to plan hunts, to pass stories to their children. In an environment that was actively trying to kill you, fire was the one thing that made staying in one place possible long enough to rest, heal, and think. But here is the part that makes this finding even more interesting. Despite how critical fire clearly was to survival during the Ice Age, there are surprisingly few archaeological fire sites from this exact period. Fire evidence is abundant before the last glacial maximum, and abundant after it. But during the coldest stretch, the record goes nearly silent. Murphy raised the question openly. Did people run out of fuel? Did the constant freezing and thawing of the ground destroy the evidence? Or did they develop other ways to stay warm that we have not figured out yet? The Corman 9 hearths prove that at least some communities were expert fire handlers, but the gaps in the record suggest the full picture is still being assembled. Fire kept them warm, but warmth alone would not keep a person alive at -40 degrees, not without something between their skin and the wind. And this is where the story takes a turn that honestly surprised me the first time I came across it. These people were tailors, real tailors, not someone wrapping a hide around their shoulders and calling it a coat. They designed fitted, insulated, multi-layered garments using techniques that would not look out of place in a modern workshop. At the La Prairie Mammoth site in Converse County, Wyoming, archaeologists uncovered 32 bone needle fragments that date back roughly 13,000 years. Using mass spectrometry and micro-CT scanning, the research team identified the animal species the needles were made from. They included foxes, hares, rabbits, and even big cats like bobcats and mountain lions. These were not thick, crude tools. They were fine, delicate instruments shaped specifically for stitching tight seams in animal hides. Todd Suravel, one of the researchers, noted that the garments these needles produced were likely comparable to those worn by the Inuit, designed to handle brutal cold and high wind. The needles were small because they had to be. Tight stitching means smaller seams. Smaller seams mean better insulation, and better insulation means the difference between surviving a winter and freezing to death in your sleep. And these were not the only needles. At a 20,000-year-old winter campsite called Kammern-Grubgraben in Austria, archaeologists found dozens of eyed bone needles alongside massive piles of reindeer bones, teeth, and antlers. The site sits in a region where the mean annual temperature during the last glacial maximum hovered around -3.5 degrees Celsius. The researchers concluded that the hunters at this site specifically targeted reindeer to tailor snug, waterproof clothing from their thick winter fur. This is not grabbing whatever animal happens to be nearby. This is selecting materials for a purpose, the way a designer picks fabric for a specific garment. Think about that for a second. These people figured out that different animals had different fur densities and different levels of water resistance, and they used that knowledge to build garments that matched the conditions they were facing. That is not instinct. That is applied material science, practiced by people who did not have a word for it. Then there is Conley Caves in Oregon, where pieces of animal hide, stitched together with plant and animal cords, were found alongside crafted bone needles and decorative adornments. A study published in Science Advances dated these artifacts to roughly 12,000 years ago, making them potentially the oldest known sewn clothing in the world. Richard Rosenkrantz, a doctoral researcher at the University of Nevada, Reno, said it clearly. They were accomplished and serious sewists during the Ice Age. The variety of animal species represented, including elk, bison, rabbit, hare, and fox, shows that these people made strategic choices about which materials to use for which purpose. Tough elk hide for outer layers, soft rabbit fur for lining, fox fur for trim and extremity coverage. Ian Gilligan, an archaeologist at the University of Sydney, pointed out that crafting needles from small animal bones is a time-consuming task. So any strategy that made the process more efficient carried direct survival advantages. These were not people scraping by. They were engineering their own survival, one stitch at a time. But clothing only solves half the problem. You can dress for the cold, but if you are sleeping on frozen ground with nothing between you and a -30-degree wind, you are still in serious trouble. And this is where the story enters territory that feels almost unbelievable. Because when wood was scarce and stone was buried under ice, our ancestors built their homes out of something else entirely. They built them out of mammoths. In 1965, a farmer in the village of Mezherik in central Ukraine was digging to expand his basement when his shovel hit something enormous. It was a mammoth jawbone. As he kept digging, more bones appeared. Archaeologists eventually excavated the site and uncovered 4 prehistoric huts constructed from a total of 149 mammoth bones. The structures dated between roughly 23,000 and 12,000 years ago, making them some of the oldest known built dwellings in human history. Each hut was circular, between 6 and 10 meters in diameter, with a hearth near the center. Jawbones formed the walls, tusks arched overhead like frozen ribs. The whole thing was likely covered in animal hides for insulation. A study published in Open Research Europe by archaeologist Wei Chu of Leiden University brought new precision to the dating. By analyzing small mammal remains found within the archaeological layers, the team determined that the largest structure at Mezherik dates to roughly 18,000 years ago, right after the peak of the Last Glacial Maximum. And here is the part that changes the picture entirely. The structure appears to have been used for up to 429 years. Not 429 days, years. Multiple generations of people returning to the same spot, maintaining the same bone walls, building fires in the same central hearth. The researchers were careful to point out that these were not permanent settlements. They described them as practical solutions for survival, places where nomadic groups could shelter during the worst stretches of winter before moving on. But the fact that people returned to the same structure for centuries tells you something about how these communities operated. They had memory, they had roots, they passed knowledge from parent to child about where to go when the cold came. Large pits filled with stone tools, bone fragments, and ash have been found near the huts, suggesting these were not just places to sleep, they were places to work. People processed animal hides here, sharpened tools, stored dried meat for later. The shelters were small by modern standards, and they were shared by multiple people. Privacy was not a concept when your survival depended on body heat from the person next to you. These were tight, smoky, dimly lit spaces where families huddled around a fire and waited for the worst of the storm to pass. It was uncomfortable, it was cramped, but it kept them alive when the temperature outside could freeze exposed skin in minutes. And the reason these structures exist at all is because the landscape of Ice Age Ukraine looked nothing like a forest. It was an open steppe, similar to modern Alaska or Siberia, with almost no trees large enough for construction. But it was populated by massive herds of woolly mammoths. So when Ice Age humans needed building materials, they used what was available. Mammoth skulls, ribs, tusks, and leg bones became the lumber of the frozen plains. Some archaeologists have argued that the scale and complexity of these structures suggest they carried social or even ritual significance, calling them the earliest examples of monumental architecture. Shelter and warmth and clothing still leave one critical problem unsolved. You can survive the cold, but you cannot survive without food. And feeding yourself during the Ice Age was not a matter of wandering around and picking berries. The growing season for plant food was almost non-existent in northern latitudes. Survival depended on meat, and getting meat meant hunting animals that were bigger, faster, and more dangerous than you. Upper Paleolithic humans, the people living through the last Ice Age, made enormous leaps in tool-making during this period. The last Ice Age corresponds with what archaeologists call the Upper Paleolithic, a span from roughly 40,000 to 10,000 years ago, during which humans made some of their greatest technological advances. They developed the atlatl, a spear-throwing device that extended the range and power of a thrown spear by acting as a lever. They carved barbed harpoons from antler and bone. They created some of the first composite tools, weapons made from multiple materials, fitted and glued together for a specific purpose. A single hunting point might involve a stone blade, a bone shaft, and plant fiber binding, each component chosen for what it did best. But even with these advances, their weapons were effective only at close range. Taking down a wild horse or a reindeer often meant getting within a few body lengths of the animal. Skeletal evidence from Ice Age hunter remains shows a pattern of injuries consistent with close contact with large, panicked prey. Broken ribs, fractured arms, blunt force trauma to the head. These were not people hunting from a safe distance. They were putting their bodies on the line every time they needed to eat, so they used their brains to tilt the odds. At the Roche de Solutre in eastern France, at the foot of a massive limestone cliff, archaeologists uncovered one of the most impressive mass hunting sites in all of Western Europe. The site was used for over 25,000 years by successive waves of hunters, from Neanderthals through modern humans. The bone deposits at the base of the rock contain the remains of thousands upon thousands of horses and reindeer. For a long time, a popular legend held that hunters chased the animals up the cliff and drove them over the edge. But modern archaeology disproved that in the 1960s, the kill site is too far from the cliff face and the terrain does not support a stampede. What actually happened was more sophisticated. Hunters intercepted migrating herds as the animals moved through the Solutre Valley during their seasonal journeys between the lowland plains and the upland hills. They used the natural geography, the narrow valley flanked by the limestone tower, as a bottleneck. Some researchers believe they lit fires in strategic positions to funnel the herds into a tighter space where waiting hunters could close in. This was not one person with a spear. This was a coordinated group operation involving planning, communication, knowledge of animal behavior, and a deep understanding of the terrain. The site provides evidence that both horses and reindeer were hunted seasonally, with peak kills in late summer and winter. Hares appear to have been taken year-round, suggesting the site was occupied across multiple seasons. The high-fat diet that resulted from this kind of hunting was itself a survival tool. Reindeer, mammoth, bison, and wild horse are all rich in calories and fat, exactly what a human body needs to generate heat in freezing conditions. Studies of modern populations living in Arctic conditions show that a high-fat diet can increase the body's resting metabolic rate, meaning you literally burn warmer from the inside out. Ice Age humans did not know the biochemistry, but they knew the result. Fat kept you alive. Lean meat alone could actually kill you, a condition modern survival experts call rabbit starvation, where you eat protein but starve for the calories your body needs to stay warm. In coastal areas, clans supplemented their diet with fish, seals, and shellfish. The excavations at Waterfall Bluff, a coastal rock shelter in South Africa, have uncovered evidence of human occupations stretching from roughly 35,000 years ago through the end of the last Ice Age, revealing how coastal communities adapted their diets across glacial and interglacial cycles. Inland groups stockpiled dried and smoked meat inside their shelters to carry them through the darkest winter months. when hunting was too dangerous or too difficult. The famous site at Salutre in France even shows evidence of smoking and butchering on a massive scale, with bones from hundreds of thousands of animals processed over millennia. The interconnectedness of all these systems is what made survival possible. The tools enabled the hunting. The hunting provided the hides. The hides became the clothing and the shelter walls. The food fueled the bodies that did the work. Every piece depended on every other piece, but survival alone does not explain what happened inside those mammoth bone huts and limestone overhangs. Because these people did something that no survival manual would ever tell you to do. They made art. And not simple art, extraordinary art. In September of 1940, 4 French teenagers descended into a hillside cave near the town of Montignac in the Dordogne region. They were reportedly hoping to find buried treasure. What they found instead was a gallery of prehistoric paintings that would change how the entire world understood early humans. The Lascaux cave contains roughly 600 wall paintings and 1,500 engravings carved into the stone walls and ceilings of multiple interconnected chambers. Horses dominate the imagery, followed by stags, wild cattle, ibex, and bison. The paintings date to roughly 17,000 to 21,000 years ago, placing them squarely in the Ice Age. Some of the bull figures in the Great Hall of the Bulls stretch to 5 meters in length, making them the largest known images in Ice Age art. The artists used the natural curves and bumps of the cave walls to give their figures a sense of volume and motion. Bulls appear to charge. Horses seem to gallop. In one section known as the crossed bison, the painter depicted 2 bison with their hind legs overlapping in a way that demonstrates a genuine understanding of visual perspective. These are not stick figures scratched into a wall by someone with nothing better to do. They are works of art created by people who studied the animals they lived alongside, observed how muscles moved under skin, and found ways to freeze that motion in pigment on stone. The Lascaux paintings changed public perception of prehistoric humans. Before this discovery in the middle of the 20th century, most people imagined Ice Age humans as primitive brutes, barely capable of thought beyond their next meal. Lascaux destroyed that assumption. The level of observation and skill required to produce these images is staggering, and it tells us something that bones and tools cannot. These people had imagination, they had aesthetic sense. They cared about beauty and meaning, not just calories and warmth. Historians have debated the purpose of the Lascaux paintings for decades. Some believe they depict past hunting victories. Others argue they were created as part of rituals to ensure future success in the hunt. We may never know the full answer. But what we do know is that the communities who painted these walls also maintained trade networks that stretched across hundreds of kilometers. Shells from the Mediterranean coast have been found at inland Ice Age sites in central France and beyond, proving that these groups were not isolated bands of desperate survivors. They were connected societies, exchanging goods, sharing knowledge, and maintaining cultural traditions across vast distances during the worst climate their species had ever encountered. And here is where the story connects to you, personally, because the Ice Age did not just test ancient humans, it shaped the ones who came after. It shaped us. When Homo sapiens migrated out of Africa and into the frozen landscapes of Europe and Asia, they encountered another species of human that had been living in the cold for hundreds of thousands of years: the Neanderthals. Neanderthals were shorter than modern humans, with barrel chests, powerful limbs, and large noses specifically adapted for warming and humidifying cold, dry air before it reached their lungs. They were skilled hunters, controlled fire, lived in shelters, and cared for their sick and elderly. Their cranial capacity was actually slightly larger than that of modern humans, meaning their brains were at least as big as ours, and possibly bigger. They had been adapting to European winters for somewhere around 300,000 years by the time our ancestors showed up. They knew the terrain, the animals, the seasons. They were the cold weather experts. And then something happened that scientists only confirmed after the Neanderthal genome was sequenced in 2010. Our ancestors interbred with them. The result is that people of European, Asian, and Native American descent carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA in their genomes today. That might sound tiny, but its effects are measurable. A study published in Communications Biology found that a gene inherited from Neanderthals influences nose shape in modern humans, specifically a gene that produces a taller nose from top to bottom. The researchers believe this trait was the product of natural selection, helping ancient humans breathe more efficiently in cold climates after leaving Africa. Dr. Kaustubh Adhikari from UCL, one of the authors, said it plainly. Some DNA inherited from Neanderthals influences the shape of our faces, and this could have been helpful to our ancestors, as it has been passed down for thousands of generations. A related study from the same research group identified another gene, called TBX15, linked to the ancient Denisovans, a separate archaic human species that lived in Central Asia. This gene affects lip shape and may have played a role in body fat distribution, helping those who carried it adapt to colder environments. Not every modern human has this gene sequence, which is itself evidence of how uneven the inheritance from these ancient encounters has been. So the next time you look in a mirror and wonder where you got the shape of your nose, or the way your body stores fat in certain places, the answer might be stranger than you ever expected. It might trace back to a meeting between two different kinds of humans on a frozen plain somewhere in Europe or Western Asia, tens of thousands of years ago, when both species were fighting the same quiet, desperate war against the cold. And the fact that you are here at all means they won. The Ice Age lasted in its most severe form for roughly 7,000 years. During that time, our ancestors built houses from the bones of giants. They tailored fitted clothing using needles carved from the skeletons of foxes and mountain lions. They controlled fire with a precision that modern scientists are still working to fully understand. They coordinated hunts across entire valleys, using landscape and flame to bring down animals 10 times their size. They painted underground cathedrals with images so beautiful that when 20th century teenagers stumbled into one of them, they thought they had found treasure. They did not have electricity, insulation, grocery stores, or weather forecasts. They had each other. They had knowledge passed down across generations. And they had brains that refused to accept freezing to death as a reasonable outcome. Every technological comfort you have right now exists because those people made it through. Their survival was not luck. It was engineering, cooperation, and a stubborn, creative refusal to die. And the proof is not just in the archaeological record, it is in your DNA. If this video made you look at your ancient ancestors a little differently, hit subscribe and leave a comment telling us which survival skill impressed you the most. And if you know someone who would find this story as wild as you did, share it with them.